Greetings, everyone. This is Jeff Schechter, aka Shecky, with the High Return Real Estate Show, and very, very excited to be here with my amazing partner, Mr. Jack Gibson. How you doing, Jack?
Shecky, I'm great as normal, and again, very excited to do this podcast today.
Yeah, this is a pretty unusual twist. The title of today's show is called "No Money Down Real Estate: Myth or Reality." So what we're going to do is ask the question, can you actually buy property with no money down? And today's show is all about deconstructing many of the myths that are out there surrounding this no money down conversation. Welcome to the High Return Real Estate Show, the podcast for heavy hitters. 2 men, 1 mission. It's time to build your empire. Okay, we are back, and we're going to go through a lot of these, what I would call legitimate methods for acquiring properties without money down. But it's really, really important that you stay on until the end, because there are some pretty big disclaimers that we have about these at the end of the podcast that's going to bring it all home for you. So, Jack, let's first talk about this. I mean, you've obviously been involved in borrowing from a HELOC. So I want you to just talk about, in general, the ways of borrowing money that don't require putting money down.
Sure, Shecky. You know, one thing I just really feel I need to share is back about 20 years ago, right, when I first read the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I got real excited about investing in real estate. But the challenge was, at the time, I mean, I'm only, maybe 21. No, I wasn't even 20. Yeah. So I didn't have any money accumulated to kind of put into practice or into play what Robert talked about in his book. Although I was very excited about it, I saw the vision. I didn't have any money. So then I got a book called No Money Down Real Estate. It was, I can't remember the author, but it was a big time seller because I wanted to get in the game.
Sorry to interrupt. Was that Carlton Sheets?
No, it's like, his name was like, I think it was another Robert. I think if you did a Google search, or Amazon, it probably would come up.
Because I'm old enough to remember all those guys that used to do all those late night infomercials.
Right.
And then I get so excited about what they were saying because I wouldn't sleep all night after watching that infomercial because I got so excited about investing.
Right, for sure. So basically what happened was I read that book and I walked away from it and said, you know what, this sounds great. There's some really cool ideas here. I can see how somebody could creatively make this work. I said, at the end of the day, is what I said, this is my conversation with myself. I said, look, why rush getting into the game if you don't have any cash? Like, why like push the timetable ahead of where I should actually get started in the game? And this will just be a big distraction to me to try to figure this out, do all these creative ways, come up with all these no money down deals. And if I do get into any trouble, I don't have any cushion to back myself up. You know, if I make some mistakes or anything, I have no cash to, be able to compensate for those. Yeah. So at the end of the day, I walked away from that and I said, Shecky, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my income. So I'm just going to put all 100% of my focus into growing my business, and I'm going to work on saving money. So I'm going to play offense, play defense, create some surplus cash. And then later on in the future, I'm going to come in, I'm going to play this game with money. So that was my final takeaway. Now, everybody's different. And I know some of our listeners are really, really anxious to get in the game, and they don't want to wait, and they want to do it with no money down. So we're going to talk to you guys and kind of give you some ideas and some disclaimers, big disclaimers, about how this can be done. So it just, at the end of the day, Shecky, I'm going to go back to our previous podcast, Cash is King. So if you guys haven't listened to that one, go back to that podcast, and that'll really teach you a lot about how you're going to really put yourself in the maximum position to profit in real estate. And again, you're getting our opinion. So let's go to number one. Legit methods of acquiring properties. Number one is borrowing money, right? So we've talked about HELOCs. we've heard, there's other lines of credit you can get, although those are very challenging to get without them being secured. You can do them, and there are ways to do that with credit cards, and there's companies that we can even recommend to you that will be able to help you do that. You can go to your personal network. You can go to an individual hard money lender. So really anything that isn't structured in a traditional way, like a mortgage, that you go through the traditional normal process, right? So sometimes, this is rare cases, even if it's legal in your area, you can borrow your broker's commission for a short time and use those funds for a down payment. Now that sounds very complicated, Shecky. So
Yeah.
I don't know if I want to go there, but hey, you know what? All the ideas we're just throwing them out there. So you can borrow somebody else's money to make your down payment, but here's what you're also going to run into. They're usually going to ask you to source those funds. So I know when I go to get a loan, and I have several loans, and I'm a big fan of leverage. I want to do it in a responsible way, and I urge all of you to do the same thing, not over leverage yourself. But they usually ask, like, okay, you got to transfer money in, or like they look at your bank statements and like, where did this money come from? Tell us, you have to show us and prove that this was your money and that this wasn't you borrowing somebody else's money in order to make this down payment. So that's a challenge that you're going to run up against. So just know that if you do try to borrow money, a lot of times, it's going to have to be sourced. So Shecky, what's number 2?
Well, you can, in some cases, assume an existing mortgage. So, again, this is more of I guess I would say a retail type play. But there are a number of mortgage contracts out there that do not have a due on sale clause. And due on sale clause just means that if the property sells, then all the money is due to the lender. If it doesn't have that clause, that means you could sell the property and the loan could still stay in place. In other words, you have a choice of not having to have to pay it off. And in that case, you can write a contract that is subject to on the contract. Now, again, there's all kinds of training programs out there that you can get into. Again, there's some complexity to this, to use your word, Jack, but it basically allows you to use the seller's existing finance as part or all of the purchase price. So, you're going to get into a situation that obviously this is only attractive if the current loan has any kind of reasonable interest rate. If it's got a super high interest rate, why the heck do you want to assume somebody else's loan? Like if it's just for the sake of doing something, no money down, it may not necessarily be attractive. But it's definitely a method that is used and it's legitimate. I agree with you. It's not necessarily something that would be part of my strategy, but it's definitely a legitimate method of doing a no money down deal.
Sure. So next up is a lease with an option to buy. So sometimes you can rent a property from an owner with an option to buy. So you and the seller are going to agree to a predetermined price of which, at some point in the future, you'll be, paying that off, right? In the interim, you're also going to agree that a certain portion of your rent will go towards the purchase price, and or down payment or towards the equity for that property. Now, this typically does not get you and put you in the driver's seat to get the best deal. So
yeah,
we do,
sure.
Shecky, we actually have investors that we set up with this situation where they're on the not the buying end, but they're on the other side of the equation, right?
So they're the seller, right?
Yeah, they're the seller, exactly.
They own the property and they're renting it out to the renter. They're the would-be seller if the contract is ever exercised.
Exactly. So they get more from the renters on the purchase price of this property than even what they could get for market rate. So for the seller's perspective, it's a phenomenal deal because they're getting thousands of dollars above even market rate because they're offering this special creative financing to the, renter / buyer, right? So just kind of going back to what I said with cash is king, like you're not in a very leveraged position. You're not in a very, great position. You haven't put yourself in the driver's seat when you're buying this way. And it's not even legal in every state, so you got to make sure that your local laws allow this. But again, this is a way that you can get into the game with no money down. So, Shecky, what's up next?
Yeah, next one is seller financing. And that, in my opinion, this one's probably the most simple way to get into a no money down deal. It's a pretty easy way to acquire property, but again, you need a pretty hungry seller, and it's best obviously if that seller owns the property outright. Like there's no other loans to cure or pay off or liens against the property in any way. But so here's a couple of possible situations, right? Like the seller could potentially decline a down payment in return for higher monthly payments.
Sure.
So let's say they were selling $100,000 property. They wanted you to put 20% down. They're only going to be financing 80 grand now. The payments on 100 grand without money down mean more to them per month. They might be requiring a more passive monthly income based on their lifestyle. And they can obviously, over the term of that note, make a little bit more interest on 100K than they could on 80K. So they might be willing to give up that 20K up front. That's one scenario, right? Or they may say, look, I'm desperate to sell this property. If you're making me an offer without a down payment, maybe you increase the price or you do something, or we create some different terms or get it paid off faster. I'm willing to do a no money down deal if I can get to the closing table quickly. And again, obviously that's going to require a pretty motivated seller. And so there's lots of things you can do, like offer them a higher price in lieu of a down payment. And again, all negotiable, but dependent on sellers' motivations. So, again, you may not always, I agree with you, Jack, it may not always be in the most leveraged position, but if you happen to find a seller that is really motivated and maybe all the other offers that have come around were just not acceptable for whatever reason, and you've got somebody pretty desperate, then now that may be one of those few situations where you may actually be in the driver's seat. But clearly, if that's the case, there's probably a reason why nobody else was really interested in that seller's deal. So just be careful.
Yeah. And, one thing to consider too with this particular method is that there's a huge numbers of baby boomers that are going into their, retirement years where they just don't have the bandwidth. They don't want to mess around with owning property. They don't want really any of the, anything to do with it, except they want to, catch the income each month off of that asset. So in other words, their thought is, okay, I could sell this property for cash, but then I've got to take that cash and I've got to convert it into something else that's going to give me a safe interest rate or, safe return on my money. Yes. So for a lot of these, a huge percentage of these baby boomers, and a lot of them, they own, a big percentage of the nation's real estate and the nation's wealth, right? They, I think it's crazy how much. It's like, I don't know, don't quote me, 60, 70, 80%. I don't know. I'd have to look that up, but interesting, statistic to look up. They would be in the position where they would do a seller financing so that they can continue to receive the income off of that, property, but they can, really kind of absolve themselves of being the owner and anything to do with, paying taxes, collecting rent, any of those types of situations. So this is going to be, seller financing is probably out of our whole list, Shecky, I'd say gives people the best chance of doing no money down with the current state of the marketplace and the kind of the life cycle of where the boomers are at with the amount of wealth that they hold.
Yeah, I would say it's probably certainly one of the most legit on the list. Keep in mind too, if as a nuance to what you just said, if you're making an offer on a property to one of those said baby boomers and you understand that, it's attractive to them to hold the note, keep in mind now you're going to be competing on a performance standpoint of what that note represents. So, if they can go out and say, buy a property from us as an example, which is completely turnkey, and they can make 12 or 13 or 14%, right? Yes, there's, occasionally situations where there's not renters and there are things like that. They may not want that. But if you're offering 2 or 3% on interest, you're probably not going to get it, right? So you're going to
Mm-hmm.
have to be somewhere in that probably more like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11%
For
range
sure.
of what you're offering on interest to get that to be attractive to the seller to hold the note. So just recognize that if you put yourself in that position, you're still competing with people like us who sell turnkey stuff, right?
Sure.
So it,
Or they're competing with, low risk bonds, that kick off, 2, 3, maybe 4%. I
yeah,
know a lot of baby boomers go to those bonds as part of their portfolio because, of what they consider them to be very safe and just a steady, however low, very low interest rate. But still, you're going to have to beat those, and so, yeah, I think you're right, Shecky. I don't see them doing too much less than 7, 8, 9, even 10%. And then you've got to outperform that or outpace that interest rate in order to actually profit. So they're
right. That's a
getting
whole
their,
nother story. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So now you got to pay that every month plus all your other expenses. And that might make it challenging to actually clear a positive cash flow depending on what you get and what kind of deal you get. So
Right,
next
Gary.
up is swapping personal property. Now this is definitely a very, very creative way, Shecky. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this could be like cars, motorhomes, campers, furniture, appliances, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you have a Honus Wagner 1907 baseball card worth, a couple $1 million that, you could trade, whatever. Again, this is negotiable and definitely will depend on the seller's motivations.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing you can swap also at times, again, just being creative is you can swap your skills. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're a person that happens to know accounting or building contracting, plumbing, you can work on cars, maybe you're a doctor, chiropractor, digital marketing, or you have any kind of professional skills that the seller might be in need of, you can offer those services in lieu of a cash payment. Again, very creative, very unusual, just an idea for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So then next up is taking on a partner. So if you can, there's a lot of value in the marketplace for being able to find a great deal. So you can set it up to where you find the deals, you do all the work to get out there and hustle and find great deals. And then you bring that deal to a partner who has capital. And so you're obviously going to have to figure out a way to split up the profit because he's going to want to return on his capital and you're going to get a return just for finding the deal. So if you can figure out a way to broker a deal, you could make a certain percentage for just bringing the buyer and the seller together. So that's another great way to do, low money down or no money down, I should say. Again, that's really, to me, is not passive income though, Shecky. And that's what I love, is just knowing that the check's coming in month after month after month. Taking on a partner, going out and finding deals, that's more active real estate. That's really more like getting out there and putting your sweat, capital, time, hours in to be able to get that kind of return. So I like buy and hold because I want passive residual income every month.
Yep. I just thought of one that we did not put on our list that I do want to talk about, and we'll dial back around to that. So just remind me before we close out. But another creative way of doing things is taking on sellers' debts. So, obviously, if you've got a motivated seller, the likelihood of them owing money on other things is probably pretty high, right? So again, how can you scratch their itch, right? Maybe they need to pay off other debts. Maybe it's a car loan, a boat loan, whatever. You can assume those debts instead of making a down payment, again, if the seller is amenable. So just another creative way of doing things.
Sure. Another way you can do is exchange properties. If you can find a seller that's willing to exchange your property for another property, that's another legit method. Now that's got to be pretty tricky and complex to be able to pull that one off too, because you got to find, the right seller, and seems like a lot of work to me, Shecky, that I really don't want to do, but certainly, a legitimate way to, to make it happen.
Yeah. So I want to just talk a little bit about, this list. And, you kind of alluded to it, Jack, in that there's not a lot of really passive style of investing here. This means going out and being really creative, really aggressive, sifting through a lot of possible sellers just to find some sort of needle in the haystack, as it were. And here's where I really want to get into some of the disclaimers that we had talked about at the top of the show. So first of all, there's a ton of marketing, as we know, surrounding the no money down conversation. Well, why is that? Because there's a ton of people out there without any money, right? So, and all these people that don't have money want to make money. And of course, they understand, rightly so, that they can make money with real estate investing. But what ends up happening is there becomes a lot of shrewd marketers, oftentimes charlatans. I hate to use that word, but they're just putting this weird, crappy spin on a lot of different methods that make it seem to the uneducated that you can just waltz into a deal, a big money-making deal, without any money of your own, right? It's like, well, if that's the case, we would all be gazillionaires, right? It's just not quite that simple. And so I just find that to be very, very misleading, right? So remember, you're listening to this, like, as humans, obviously, we tend to see and hear what we want to, right? I'm going to give you a really, really good example. And this was done intentionally to, I'm just going to come clean to the audience and the people listening. This was done intentionally. So the title of this podcast is No Money Down Real Estate, Myth or Reality. Notice that the title is not No Money Down Real Estate Investing, Myth or Reality, right? I purposely left that word off the title. Now, you as the listener saw the title or heard the title somewhere, and you saw and heard what you wanted to, right? So recognize that there's a lot of ways that we can be misled. I feel like there is one method that's fairly passive, and this is what I was reminded of a couple minutes ago, that can be a pretty good legitimate way of buying good, solid investment property without money down, right? And here's the way it works. We found a source that actually can loan money with unsecured lines of credit through 0% interest credit cards. And they do it for about 12 months, I believe, which gives you time to pay cash for a less expensive property and then dial back around with real cash out refinancing legitimately, and then use the cash out refi to pay off the initial credit card advances. So again, there is some complexity to that, right? But if you want to find out more about that, you're listening to this podcast, you are more than welcome to write to myself or Jack. You can write to Shecky, Shecky, at highreturnrealestate.com, or Jack at highreturnrealestate.com. And we'll be happy to send you the link to these people that we found. And I find they're very good. They do a very, very good job. They're very legit. And we have had some investors that have used that strategy successfully. It's not commonly used, but it can be used successfully if you're really looking to do things correctly. But dialing back around, Jack, I mean, what do you think? Like, is it, given the other stuff that we talked about, do you feel like with some of this motivated seller conversation and most of these no money down strategies, is it likely that an investor is going to go out and find a performing property using these methods?
Well, they could definitely find a performing property, Shecky. I just feel like their chances and their margins, are going to be pretty slim and tight. When you look at what do I like? Do I like cash flow or appreciation? And I think this should be our next podcast. Well, I like both. I like cash flow because I like the stable, monthly income and passive nature of the cash flow. But I love appreciation too. But what I like to do is be in control of appreciation through what I call forced appreciation. So in other words, I want to buy a property at a discount because it needs repairs, it needs rehabs that nobody else wants to take on. And I want to, deploy a team, put those updates in, and then force the value of the property up versus just buying, holding, and like praying that it goes up, right? You cannot do that type of situation where you get cash flow and forced appreciation when you don't have any cash, Shecky. You can't do that in a no money down situation. I mean, I shouldn't say you can't. It's very, very difficult. And your chances of getting it done would have to be very, 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 very challenging situation. So, I think that the best thing overall is just put some cash together somehow and then go out and you're in control and you're in the driver's seat. But again, you're getting my opinion, our opinion.
Yeah.
So do your diligence first and make sure the numbers work and the property, that the property will perform for the long haul. And if it's still a contender, then and only then should you consider some of the strategies that we've mentioned.
Yeah. I mean, I just kind of want to, I feel like, this is almost like a public service announcement to our audience. And there's just, we get, through our website and many of the stuff that we do online, we just get a lot of questions about, financing and money, no money down and all. I mean, it's everywhere. It's just everywhere. And Jack, out of respect for you, I want to say, look, to all the listeners, Jack has got a ton of passive income in his own personal portfolio. And you heard what he said as far as starting by just saving up some cash so that he could buy his first property. And again, I agree. I would also defer to our other podcast called Cash is King, because it's going to start giving you an understanding of the power that you hold in a negotiating process when you have cash, or the power of the kinds of properties that you're able to purchase, and to give you that kind of profitability that you're looking for so that you can truly be a very, very successful investor. I think, if you look at the real estate world in general and you look at all the stuff and all the conversations and stories that go online, there are thousands, probably millions of real estate investors that have had many deals that were not profitable. Like, kudos to them for getting in the game. That's great. Okay. But in my mind, like, if I'm going to get in the game, I'm getting in the game to win.
Right.
It's not just about getting in the game.
For sure.
Right. So it's, we want to do everything we can to help our investors and our listeners understand that, yes, there's a game that has to be played, but let's all play it to win at the highest level. Right. And so that said, huge disclaimer here, don't be a victim of all this advertising and marketing. Don't be sucked into all this foolish no money down thing. And like Jack says, do your due diligence first. Look at what that property represents and what its numbers are like when you crunch the numbers, right? Because honestly, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is.
Right.
And I know that sounds very cliche, but that's just, it's still the way things are. And, the other thing is, if you got some good, let's just say, wake up call or a clearer understanding of this subject, look, there's a ton of investors out there who need to hear this. And that's why we did this. So, if you're listening to this, you have a fellow investor that, is a little bit stuck on this no money down thing, and you want to have them hear, the real skinny on how this stuff is, by all means, please share the link to this podcast with them. And, hopefully they'll gain some insights, and hopefully you gain some insights too. But Jack, that's all I got, man. I just really appreciate you and your insights. And I feel like this was kind of the PSA type podcast, and it needed to be done.
Right. Yeah. Good stuff. All right, guys. So here's the deal. We'd really, really appreciate you guys going and giving us a 5-star review. This is so important to us because it helps us to get this content out to more investors. If you find value in our podcast, please give us a 5-star review and we'd really appreciate that. And then also, if you have a desire to get passive income turnkey properties, you can check out our it's still new, Shecky, right? It's still newly revamped website.
Beautiful.
I don't know what point it stops being new, but it's still new. highreturnrealestate.com. And you can take a look at available properties that we have there. We've really acquired quite a few in the last month. So there's some brand new deals there, or you can book a call and you can get access to properties that we have yet to post on our website that are very new acquisitions. So with that, Shecky, thank you everybody for listening, and stay tuned to our next podcast, which is going to be cash flow or appreciation. We're going to dive more into that. There's a lot more I'd like to share with you guys about that. It's a great debate within real estate investing world. And I have some, I think, really incredible insights for you guys and things to consider. So.
Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to that. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you again, Jack, for your friendship and leadership and partnership. It's always great. Appreciate you.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.